Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs, once again. It is I, the notoriously sanctimonious master of fun and wonder, Robert Meyer Burnett, here with you, imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. And once again, this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations number 219, brought to you, as always, by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you punch in PGS when you check out for Post-Geek Singularity, you get 20% off your order. I think I've now trained Gilbert. As we all know, Gilbert and Tallulah rule this house. And Gilbert, whenever I guess he hears me talking on the microphone, he decides it's time for him to get a cookie. And usually he's right about that. I got both Gilbert and Tallulah here. So, okay, kids. Whoever's jumping up, Gilbert gets a cookie. Okay. And then Tallulah gets a cookie, and Gilbert gets another cookie. Hey, buddy. I understand. Okay, I get it. Okay, now I got to do the show. That's it. Oh, good kiss, buddy. Give me a kiss, baby. Yeah. Oh, come on. Now down. Okay, good boy. Good boy. Down. All right, there you go. Gilbert and Tallulah, ladies and gentlemen, of course, as you know, they're both doodles. Gilbert is a 25% Bernese Mountain Dog, 75% Poodle, and Tallulah is an Irish Doodle. She is 50% Irish Setter and 50% Doodle, and all pain in the ass. But she's licking me, and she's delightful. Both of these dogs are delightful, and they're part of the show. So if you don't like me feeding them on camera, well, then you're missing out on one of the joys of Robservations, which is a canine-friendly environment. Anyway, you know, a lot of things have been making me think about classic science fiction, the kind of science fiction that I grew up with, the stuff that I grew up liking. Why is that? Well, one of the great things I think that genre fans, imagination connoisseurs such as yourself, like to do is memorialize fictitious dates. Actually, they're not fictitious dates, but things that happen in movies that later become fictitious dates. For instance, November 2019 is when Blade Runner takes place. It's coming up. One of the great fictional dates of all time is, of course, today, September 13th, 1999, ladies and gentlemen. For you imagination connoisseurs who don't know immediately what the significance of that date is, that is, of course, Breakaway Day. And that is the day that something went terribly awry at the nuclear waste dumps on the far side of the moon that caused them to ignite. There was a massive, massive thermonuclear explosion. And as you all remember, because we memorialize it every year, it's been 20 years, but the moon was, of course, blown out of orbit, of Earth's orbit, decimating the planet, killing over 2 billion people, and leaving the Earth pretty much a ravaged wasteland. You do remember that, don't you? Well, of course, the 300-plus members of Moonbase Alpha lived through the cataclysm, and the moon was launched on a cosmic journey, a cosmic odyssey. Now, a lot of you might say, well, even if it was thrown out of Earth's orbit at near light speed, it would probably still be in the solar system, even now, 20 years later. But as we all know, if you are fans of Space 1999, the 2-season science fiction show that was produced, created by the great Jerry Anderson in the mid-70s, you know that through some kind of cosmic force, call it divine intervention, the moon and the inhabitants of Moonbase Alpha went on a cosmic odyssey. Now, as you also know, that was Jerry Anderson's second live-action series after UFO, which started production. It was UFO was 69 to 71, and then Space 1999, I believe, was 75, 76. Space 1999 was actually, they were going to do a second season of UFO, but it was very cost prohibitive, so they turned it into Space 1999. Star Trek at the time was obviously very, very popular. It had gone into strip syndication in 72, and its popularity made a large, big budget science fiction television program viable. And Jerry Anderson was able to make Space 1999. And interestingly enough, Space 1999 still to this day is one of the most beautifully designed science fiction shows ever made. Rudy Gernreich was, of course, instrumental. He was a fashion designer who designed the Moon City uniforms, replacing, well, I guess Sylvia, Jerry Anderson's wife, who had designed many of the clothes for UFO, she also designed stuff for Space 1999, but they went all out for Space 1999. It was a very expensive show. Of course, Brian Johnson, Derek Meddings, people like that worked on Space 1999. Brian Johnson went on to become an effects supervisor on The Empire Strikes Back. And if you were a kid when Space 1999 aired in the mid-70s, there was something about it that if you're a boy, I guess, I don't know about girls. I never met a girl who felt this way, but Space 1999 introduced us to one of the great, if not, I mean, everyone would say that this Starship Enterprise and the Millennium Falcon were probably the greatest two fictional starships we ever saw. But if there had to be a most valuable player, a journeyman, as it were, next on that list behind the Millennium Falcon and, of course, the Starship Enterprise would have to be the Eagle Transporter. Now, if you were a kid in the mid-70s, as I was, and you watched Space 1999, as most kids did, most boys, problem with Space 1999 is, I'll admit it, the first season and the second season, they're very different seasons for different reasons, but the first season of Space 1999 is a bit of a slog. It's not exactly the most fast-moving thing in the world. However, as I've moved through life, I've come to appreciate the first season of Space 1999 way more than I did when I was a kid. But I watched it anyway because our attention spans hadn't been obliterated. And I love to see the visual effects, which are all done with models, all in camera. And for those of you who are still wondering, well, what is the Eagle Transporter? Let me be the decider whether or not it's a spaceship worthy of approval. Here was the thing about Space 1999. The design of the Eagle Transporter was very redolent. It had a lot of the LEM, the lunar module in it that we landed, of course, on the moon with, the actual LEM. And then combined with Jerry Anderson's, of course, between Supercar and Fireball XL5 and Stingray and the Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet and Joe 90, UFO, of course. The design of vehicles in the Jerry Anderson universe could arguably be stated to be the best kind of design ever. In terms of a pantheon of science fiction, the design work in Jerry Anderson shows, there was just something about it that was like crack cocaine to my young mind. Imagination crack, as it were. And you couldn't, to see the Eagle Transporter for the first time, I was 8. To see it for the first time was to want it. It was, you wanted to reach out and touch it. And then, of course, what even furthered that was that Dinky Toys out of England. Die made these die-cast metal cars and planes. They had also made die-cast metal die-cast metal ships, toys from Jerry Anderson shows. You could famously get Thunderbird 2, which came with a little Thunderbird 4. They made Joe 90's car, of course. They made the UFO Interceptor and a UFO Mobile. Well, Dinky Toys made an Eagle Transporter from Space 1999. Of course, like all of their weird Jerry Anderson toys, none of them were the right color aside from Lady Penelope's Rolls Royce, which is actually pink. They couldn't do that wrong. They made 2 Eagle Transporters. They made the regular Eagle Transporter, then they made the Freighter Eagle later that carried the nuclear waste to the far side of the moon. And of course, smart kids would get both, and then you would swap the white Eagle with the white passenger section, the white Freighter Eagle with the white passenger section from the green and blue, or it was green and white or blue and white. Anyway, I don't get into that, getting into the weeds. But anyway, the Eagle was a thing that I had to have. And I remember seeing it at a department store, and it was like $14. Now, back in the mid-70s, when you were a kid, to get a die-cast metal Dinky toy was a big deal because they came from England and they were really expensive. And so when I saw it, it was like one of those things where, for me as a kid, I didn't feel this way about a lot of things, but it was one of those first things. It's like the Mego. When I saw the Mego Superman and Batman with the cowl that came off, I had the same response. It was like, I have to have this. Like, I have to have this right now. And of course, the Eagle Transporter, I think I got the world's greatest superheroes, the Superman and Batman, because they weren't that expensive. But there's no way at 8 years old my dad was going to flip for a $14 die-cast spaceship from England. And he was like, it looks like a grasshopper. Like, what is this? Anyway, let me show you. So throughout my life, I have bought various incarnations of the Eagle. You got to have the Eagle transporter, model kits. I've bought all different kinds of Eagles. And about 15 years ago, maybe a little less, but there was a company called Product Enterprises out of England. Now, Product Enterprises is now called 1612. But Product Enterprises made a whole range, or a whole line, they say range in the UK, a whole line of Eagles. And they also made UFO ships as well, and vehicles, the mobile, the shadow mobiles. But so Product Enterprises made 12-inch Eagles, and they also made a large 1/48 scale Eagle. They made all four of them, 4 different Eagles. Now, I had 2 of these Product Enterprises Eagles, and if you look up how much a 1/48 scale, a studio scale, or whatever Product Enterprises Eagle costs, they're very expensive. And a friend of mine, I'm going to out him, Adrian Iscaria, I loaned him my 2 large-scale Eagles for presentations, and he gave one of them away to some executive. I'm like, dude, you weren't supposed to give them away. I don't care what who you're trying to grease. You can't give. He did. He gave one of my Eagles, my Product Enterprises Eagles, away. And it was the non-rescue Eagle. See, there was a rescue Eagle. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you my Product Enterprises Eagle. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is, of course, the Eagle transporter, one of the greatest fictional spaceships known to man. Look, even this, it comes apart. Here, you take this out. You got the pilots sitting there, of course. They make a model kit of this now, so you can't get it in this scale anymore. But this is the Eagle transporter, and as you can see, it looks very utilitarian. Moonbase Alpha insignia there. One of the greatest spaceships of all time. And to watch Space 1999, you fall in love with this. You fall in love with this. So Product Enterprises has now become 1612, and over the last year, they've been re-releasing their Eagle transporters. They've been re-releasing their Eagle transporters in new versions that are episode specific. This is from a second season. I haven't even opened this up yet. This is a second season Space 1999 episode called The Immunity Syndrome. And what they're doing is they're adding things like this is the atmospheric thing that was mounted on the top of the Eagle and launched. So they're making 1,000 each of their episode Eagles, and they're going to release an Eagle hangar soon. It comes out next month. You can go to the 1612 website and buy it if you want. It comes with 2 different Eagles, which are awesome, and then the VIP Eagle from the first episode, Breakaway, where the moon comes out of Earth's orbit. You got to love the Eagle from Space 1999. Maybe now that we live in the post-Star Wars universe. Remember, Space 1999 was pre-Star Wars, but it was an amazing ship. And as a kid, the greatest toy, arguably the greatest toy ever before Star Wars toys came out, was Mattel made a 33-inch Eagle that came with 3 figures, the most amazing toy ever. And I love that. And they also made 8-inch Mego-style Space 1999 action figures, and they made a Moonbase Alpha play set. And Space 1999 was a big deal. I love Space 1999. I still love the Eagles. I have a whole bunch of different kinds of Eagles. On the 1612 Facebook page, they're making miniature Eagles that come with a whole landing platform and sounds and lights that are going to come out sometime in 2020. They're amazing. And today is Breakaway Day in Space 1999. September 13th, 1999 was the year that the nuclear conflagration happened on the dark side of the moon, and the moon was blown out of Earth's orbit. So it's a big day. It's Breakaway Day. And it got me thinking. You know, I think it's 20 years. It's 20 years in fictional time since September 13th, 1999. I mean, in the show, it was 1975. But anyway, it's been 2 decades since the moon was blown out of Earth orbit. And every year when September 13th, 1999 rolls around, I think about Space 1999 and classic science fiction. Now, the entire series was recently released by Shout Factory in the United States. It only ran 2 seasons. Now, as anyone who loves Space 1999 knows, there's a big difference between season 1 and season 2 of Space 1999. Fred Freiberger, who was brought in to produce the third season of the original Star Trek, came in to produce the second season of Space 1999, and he made a bunch of changes to the costumes, to the cast, these inexplicable changes. Some of our favorite characters were just gone and never mentioned again. They added a young Tony Verdeschi, this character that was supposed to be sort of the Lothario, the man of action. It was just kind of Martin Landau, of course, played Commander John Koenig, and his wife at the time, Barbara Bain, played Helena Russell, the commander and the doctor of Moonbase Alpha. It was a great show, and I'll tell you, the recently released Shout Factory Blu-rays look incredible. Now, I got the original Blu-ray set when it came out. Both seasons came out from Network in the UK, but the restoration, the beautiful, beautiful restoration of Space 1999, I recommend watching. There's not many good episodes, to be honest, in the second season, but of course there's a 2-part episode called The Bringers of Wonder, which I recommend watching. But one of the scariest things I'd ever seen in my 8 years of life on the planet was a Space 1999 episode called Dragon's Domain. It looks a little silly now, but the way it was done, it was so important, and it felt important, at least when you watch it. And it was terrifying. The episode was terrifying. There's one of the great monsters from all of sci-fi cinema or sci-fi television in Dragon's Domain. Also, for those who have a fetishistic attachment to any kind of spaceships, there's a spaceship graveyard in Dragon's Domain that you can't help but love. Can't help but love it, ladies and gentlemen. Can't help but love it. You imagination connoisseurs will definitely have their imaginations fired. By the way, you can watch the first episode of Space 1999 for free. It's on YouTube. Put it up. Shout Factory. You can watch it. See if it's for you. The first season of Space 1999, Christopher Lee was in it. Joan Collins was in it. Brian Blessed comes in the second season. There's Catherine Schell, who later comes and plays Maya in the second season, was in there's a lot of weird surrealism that happens in the first season of Space 1999. One of the episodes that, I don't know, used to unsettle me as a child was an episode called The Guardian of Peary. Space was not hospitable in Space 1999. Yeah, there was just craziness behind every corner. And there's some great episodes in the first season of Space 1999. Mission of the Darians, War Games. I mean, you'll guess the end of these episodes because they've been done to death now. But if you go back and you watch Space 1999, the first season, I highly recommend it. But, I've been thinking a lot about classic sci-fi. We've got another big anniversary. The Twilight Zone will be celebrating its 60th anniversary on October 2nd of this year. 60 years. Twilight Zone, of course, being one of the most significant television shows of all time. Its run from 1959 to 1964 was arguably one of the most influential shows ever, if not the most influential show of all time across the board, even with television creators today. Amazing. And all of this got me thinking, and I'll tell you something else that got me thinking. When I was a kid and something would air on television, I would say 50%, even something that high, of the kids I knew would watch the same stuff. So like if a James Bond movie would air on television, even if you didn't watch it, you were aware of it. Wizard of Oz would air once a year on CBS. Everybody watched it. So there was this collective thing happening, a sort of a pop culture reference point that we all would get throughout the year. And when Battlestar Galactica came on TV, like all the boys would watch it. Space 1999, that was a little bit less of a touchstone, but the people that watch it, because it was something on space, action, adventure, a lot of kids knew what it was. And when these things would happen culturally, everybody would watch them. So you go to school the next day and we had a point of reference. And even if you didn't watch it, you knew about it because invariably somebody in your house was watching it, even if you didn't. And that gave us all sort of a frame of reference, because back then, in our day, let me take my dentures out. In our day, there was three major television networks. Then we had a PBS station and an independent station. Later, Seattle had a second independent station. But at the time, in the 70s, there was really only 4 channels to watch. So we all collectively had the same kind of experience. So we would know what we're all talking about, which made it easier. There was a sort of a shorthand that we had, a cultural shorthand. And I think this applied to news. It applied to all different forms of pop culture. So we we tended to have more solidarity in terms of what we believed in or what we knew about, and there was much more of a frame of reference. So when you talk to somebody as a kid, you could be like, oh my God, did you see last night's episode of Space 1999 or Battlestar Galactica or the James Bond movie? And everybody kind of did. Now, all of that's gone away. So no one has the same frame of reference. Everybody's watching them. There's a million different things streaming all the time. So even I've heard from people that even if you're a kid today and you want to watch, you binge Stranger Things, you have to wait until all the people in class have watched it. You can't immediately talk about it because you don't want to ruin it for somebody. I heard that's actually a thing amongst our younger generation. You can't just go to elementary school and start talking about something for fear that you're going to wreck it for someone else. Because who knows, maybe someone's 3 or 4 weeks behind and they haven't got to the new season of whatever it is. So there is the idea that we were listening to the same music, watching the same TV shows, reading newspapers, watching the same news broadcasts, it's completely gone. And I think that's partly to blame for why we're as a culture, we're so fragmented. Everybody's all over the place. There's a million different opinions out there because we're no longer sort of bonded by the singular pop culture experience that we were getting. You know, every kid listened to the same 2 radio stations or something. Growing up, I listened to an AM radio station called KJR in Seattle. KJR, Seattle, Channel 95. You know, and there were shows and people would know radio disc jockeys, and there was this collective experience that everybody was having. And it gave, you know, I was reminded of this when I was watching Stand By Me, because there's a radio station that their kids are listening to, and like everybody listens to that radio station. You jump around, whether you're a kid or whether you're an older teenager, you listen to the same music. And so you have this cultural touchstone. Every kid was watching the Mickey Mouse Club, so you could talk about how Annette, her bosom was burgeoning, and everyone knew, you know, everybody knew. There was a cultural shorthand because of it. And that's why I think the Eagle Transporter took root in a child's imagination, because, you know, every kid loved the Eagle Transporter, and you played with it. And that, whether you had a Dinky toy or whether you had the Mattel toy, I had, of course, both. They were amazing. And then, of course, they eventually made MPC, the same company that put out Star Wars models. MPC released a model kit of the Eagle Transporter, which you can now get. There's incredible, you don't have to spend a lot of money on Eagles anymore. The 1612 Eagles are like between 150 and $200, but you can get model kits. You can get a 1/72 scale now, a new model kit of the Eagle, or a 1/48 scale kit that you can even buy secondary market parts with. You can get real metal engine bells to put in them, and you can get Eagles now if you want. You can get them. You can get model kits and toys, and they're out there. Space 1999, there's going to be Big Chief out of the UK is doing a John Koenig, or a 6-scale John Koenig figure that looks amazing. Commander Koenig, incredible. So, thinking a lot about that, but I'll tell you something else I did the other night. So I've been getting into watching more classic science fiction. And one of my favorite series of films when I was a kid are the Quatermass movies. Now, in America, they weren't called the Quatermass series. Those were the original British titles. For instance, the Quatermass, 1955's The Quatermass Experiment was called The Creeping Unknown here when they brought it to America. And then 2 years later, they released Quatermass 2 in England. I think that was called maybe it was just called Quatermass 2. And then, of course, Quatermass and the Pit was called 5 Million Years to Earth, and that was released in 1967. These are the movies. These are the Quatermass films. This is the first one, Quatermass 2, and Quatermass and the Pit. These films are significant because the Quatermass Experiment was directed, of course, by Val Guest. Came out in 1955, and it caused quite a stir because it received an X rating in the UK, which is why they dropped the E from the title and turned it into the Quatermass Experiment. Now, why were these films significant? These films are significant because, first of all, they presented a character, Dr. Quatermass, played in the first 2 movies by Brian Donlevy, who, by the way, was a big drunk at the time. But Brian Donlevy was his character of Dr. Quatermass was very, well, first of all, let me back up. The Quatermass films were actually based on BBC radio plays that were written by Nigel Neal. And Nigel Neal was a great British fantasist, and by all accounts, he was a very cantankerous guy because he was frequently rewritten. And the things that he made were a lot of them became famous, and he didn't get the credit he deserved. Famously, a lot of newer fans might know him as the man who originally wrote the script for Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. That was later adapted to the film they made by Tommy Lee Wallace, and Nigel Neal wasn't happy about that either. But so Nigel Neal, as a writer, wrote the Quatermass films, and other people worked on the scripts as well, but they changed a lot from the radio shows. But what's really important about the Quatermass series, it was a very serious, somber look at sci-fi horror. And the first Quatermass experiment film, of course, black and white. And it is the story of Dr. Quatermass has sent 3 astronauts into space, and their ship, they apparently have gone further out than anybody else. And their ship crashes to Earth in a field in England. And when they finally get there, when Dr. Quatermass gets there and the authorities get there and they open up the ship, 2 of the astronauts have vanished. There's just empty spacesuits. And the remaining astronaut has been afflicted with something. And we all know, as veteran science fiction fans, that he's beginning a strange metamorphosis. So not good is happening to our remaining astronaut. And a lot of people compare the actor's performance. I'm forgetting the actor's name, but compare his performance he's frequently as to Karloff's performance as the Frankenstein monster, because as he begins to change, he basically is in this catatonic, strange state, and he plays this character. It's very scary and very somber and very sad, because there's no good that's going to come of it. And he slowly transforms into this literally a bug-eyed, giant, blob-esque, sort of weird parasitic creature that is giant, 20, 30 feet across. And this creature is going to spawn. And if it does, it's going to cover London. And what this creature does is it feeds off life energy and leaves empty husks behind. And it's for a time, for 1955, the Quatermass film, the Quatermass experiment, was very graphic. There's a scene where the poor astronaut sticks his hand into a cactus and he sort of absorbs the cactus. So one of his hands starts becoming very cacti-like, and he escapes, and he's fleeing, and he goes to the zoo and is absorbing animals. And it's done in a very serious way. So for audiences at the time, they hadn't seen, of course, this is way before movies like Alien. And this was the first time really sci-fi horror was combined in this way. And so the Quatermass movies, the second one, the Quatermass 2, had basically aliens. It had a very Invasion of the Body Snatchers feel to it, and there was government conspiracies there. But it was very much, if you look at the Quatermass movies, you can see where the X-Files came from. You can see where Torchwood came from. Very similar, where they had you had scientists or very smart people as protagonists dealing with very sort of heady things. These weren't just like Them, where there's giant ants coming out of the sewers. It wasn't like that. There was definitely more philosophy happening. And I watched Shout Factory released. I owned Quatermass 2 on Laserdisc for a long time, but Shout Factory recently released Quatermass 2 and Quatermass and the Pit on Blu-ray. And then Kino Lorber, I picked this up at the Kino Lorber sale for $9 or $8 or something. And this actually has an interview with John Carpenter in it. John Carpenter was heavily influenced by the Quatermass films, and that's why he even uses the pseudonym Martin Quatermass for the screenwriter of his Prince of Darkness, which I love. And Prince of Darkness basically combined horror, literally the devil, with science. And it was that kind of feel. Torchwood Children of Earth is very much like a Quatermass story. There was a Quatermass story done in the 80s for British television. And there's a lot of really interesting, the Quatermass storylines have a very storied history. And it made me realize as I was watching these, one, I'll probably never watch the Quatermass Experiment again in my life because I won't have a reason to, because I watched The Creeping Unknown when I was a kid. It used to freak me out. But even when I was a kid, I was watching sci-fi in the 70s. So to watch classic science fiction from the 50s, even then it was a little anachronistic. But watching this again, I was actually struck at how, first of all, the transfer is beautiful, black and white, how the Quatermass experiment is very somber, and how Dr. Quatermass is not a sympathetic guy. He's kind of a dick, and he's going around the whole time, and he's like, "No, this is my experiment. I'm in charge, and damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Who cares? We got to see what's going to happen here." And while he realizes, okay, all of London and the world could be threatened by what's going on in the Quatermass experiment, he still kind of wants to see what happens. And at the end of the film, of course, also he sort of blames himself, but everybody's blaming him. There's a great police inspector in the movie, and he's being blamed like everyone's like, this is your fault. And he's like, this is not. This is the advancement of science. You know, whatever happens, we're advancing science. And it's really interesting to go back and watch this, because if they tried to make this now, if they tried to make the Quatermass experiment now, I'm sure the first studio note would be, you know, Dr. Quatermass is not the most sympathetic guy in the world. And there have been interesting, like, I think modern movies, Arrival, Denis Villeneuve's Arrival is kind of like a Quatermass story in a way. It's not exactly that way, but I've always liked the Quatermass, the kind of more serious, scientific, horrific things at the same time. One of my favorite series of novels, Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger series, of which there's a new one coming out soon. Rage, his new book, Rage, about Joe Ledger. The whole Department of Military Sciences and Jonathan Mayberry's books are very Quatermass-esque. Of course, if you like Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, very much a Quatermass story. And that's why, of course, he used that pseudonym. And I love that Quatermass feel. And of course, 5 Million Years to Earth is a movie that a lot of people have in fact seen, because Hammer horror. If you like Hammer, there's a lot of horror and sci-fi fans today, that especially younger people that haven't watched Hammer. I've talked about Hammer horror on the show. Hammer was a studio in Bray, the Bray Studios. And Hammer made they made vampire movies. They made the Peter Cushing, Dr. Frankenstein films. They made the Christopher Lee Dracula movies. But they also made movies like the Quatermass movies. They made Quatermass and Quatermass 2 and Quatermass in the Pit. And they did other movies other than just gothic horror. And they made some cutting edge X the Unknown. They made some cutting edge sci-fi films too, such as the Quatermass movies. And it's funny because watching it now, I mean, I knew it was going to be kind of anachronistic. I tried to watch it with Elizabeth and she fell right to sleep. But I watch it and yeah, it's slower paced, but I knew that going in. And I found the experience delightful. And watching all three of the Quatermass movies, these Quatermass movies, I've got the DVD of the Quatermass series, which I remember not liking. I thought it was a little murky. I think my favorite modern take on the Quatermass stories is Torchwood's Children of Earth, the third season, the 5-episode. If you've seen Torchwood Children of Earth, that's very much a Quatermass-esque storyline. I love it so much. Maybe that's why I loved it. I think it's the perfect modern, if you wanted to look at something that's analogous to the Quatermass movies, Torchwood Children of Earth, and indeed a lot of the better Torchwood episodes, very much Quatermass-esque in their conception. So that also got me thinking about a couple of things, about classic sci-fi. Like, I grew up with all of these classic sci-fi movies that I didn't necessarily consider classic sci-fi, but now they're classic sci-fi. Bill Hunt wanted me to remind everyone of Capricorn 1. I was wearing a Capricorn 1 shirt about a faked mission to Mars. And I talked a lot about Rollerball the other day. And of course, Logan's Run, which is based on the George Clayton Johnson, William F. Nolan novel that was published in 1967. But the movie, which I dearly love, I saw in the theater when I was 9. But the science fiction of the 70s, growing up loving it, mostly dystopian, but you had things like the Omega Man, which is a really interesting take on vampire myth, Boy and His Dog, Soylent Green, part of the Charlton Heston sci-fi trifecta, beginning with Planet of the Apes. I mean, you could say it's a quadrilogy if you want to include Beneath the Planet of the Apes, but I would consider Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, and the Omega Man the essential Charlton Heston sci-fi trifecta, and I can't recommend those enough. Then there's some strange movies like The Final Program that was based on Michael Moorcock's novel No Blade of Grass, which I think is based on a John Christopher novel who wrote The Tripods, famously wrote the Tripods trilogy. And there's a lot of great 70s sci-fi pre-Star Wars. Post-Star Wars, everybody started ripping off Star Wars, and that's why we got Message from Space and we got Star Crash. But pre-Star Wars, there's a lot of crazy science fiction. I've talked a little bit about the mid-60s, the Franco-Italian co-production Wild Wild Planet, which you can get from Warner Archive on DVD. I wish they'd remaster it to Blu-ray. I don't think they ever will. But if you want to watch a bonkers trailer for a movie, check out Wild Wild Planet. There's going to be a lot of you that go, oh, I can't deal with the special effects. But back in the day, people didn't know about special effects. They're like, that looks great. So there's very charming to be had, and it's really interesting. One of my favorite horror films that a lot of you Alien fans will know about, I've heard about this movie, is Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, or another movie that is often cited as It Came from Outer Space, another alien-esque kind of a movie. As a matter of fact, if you want to look into the origins of Alien, do yourself a favor and watch the double bill of It Came from Outer Space and Planet of the Vampires. That's a pretty interesting double bill. And if you've never seen the pop art joy that is Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires, I highly recommend watching Planet of the Vampires. Tobe Hooper's Life Force from '85. Watch the international cut if you watch that. Is kind of very much a Quatermass movie. So, but it's not a great movie. But Shout also released a beautiful Blu-ray of Tobe Hooper's Life Force, but I much prefer the international cut of the movie, which is almost a half an hour longer. But I really think that I don't know what's going on in the live chat. I guess you guys do. I don't know. But anyway, because it's just started rushing by my head, and I'm like, what's going on? But I do think that there's a lot of classic sci-fi films that just don't get seen anymore because people, you really do have to put yourself in a certain mindset when you're going to watch these films. And there's so many good ones to watch. But I was talking with Mike Bodden about this. If you grew up watching Jurassic Park, it's really hard to go back and enjoy a movie like Valley of the Gwangi and the stop motion joys of that. So, which is kind of a bummer because I wish that there was a way where you could, a lot of people could go back and watch these movies. But I recommend seriously taking some time out, and I know there's already so much to stream and so much new stuff to watch. And yeah, I guess someone's spamming me, which is like, okay, I guess if that's what you want to do. I don't know why, you choose to do that, but okay. It's a spam attack. But anyway, it's interesting. This spam attack right now, or these people spamming me, is exactly, it's too bad because here I'm talking about the joys of watching classic science fiction, and someone just comes in and busts up my shit. And I would say, rather than coming and spamming someone's live YouTube show, watch the Quatermass movies. Go get the Quatermass movies. You'll be better people for it. I'm going to read a letter. I got a letter in. First of all, I'm going to check in with chat. I've seen that some people have sent in some chats. And I will look into this Breakaway day. There's lots of people. Sujith is here. Sujith says, Grace Kelly is the most beautiful actress and person to ever walk this planet. Her legacy still echoes around Monaco. Binging her Alfred Hitchcock movies. Well, as everyone knows, I've said it before, if I could marry any fictional character that I ever saw in a movie, it would be Grace Kelly from Hitchcock's Rear Window. Also my favorite Hitchcock movie, but her character her character. An amazing character and an amazing lady. Suja says, I also celebrate First Contact Day, which is important. First Contact Day is definitely important. It's not today, but it's coming up, of course. Mark C. says the original design for the Millennium Falcon was almost a spitting image of the Eagle transport. Lucas rejected the design. He did, and he rejected the design. The original, you can see that. That's a famous story. It's also very true. And since Mark C. sent in that super chat, that brings me to a letter I've been saving for a while now from Mark C. Got a letter from Mark C. that deals sort of with this topic about classic sci-fi. Mark C. says, greetings, Rob. A few episodes ago, someone wanted a list of 1970s science fiction to watch. Last night, I found myself a part of a YouTube stream discussing the same subject. I'm guessing if we played the 6 Degrees of Separation game with this, it's probably the same person or group. In your list, I felt you added some movies that asked and dealt with interesting questions and subjects. But what about stupid fun? Thanks to Star Wars, the last few years of the 1970s produced some real gems. There was Star Crash with the Hoff. The Waltons' Richard Thomas joined Robert Vaughn, George Peppard, and Sybil Danning in what I can only consider to be the Seven Samurai in Space with Roger Corman's Battle Beyond the Stars. But the real Cheddar Award for fun 70s sci-fi must go to producer Glenn Larson. Larson was the one person smart enough to put a saddle on Star Wars and ride that horse until it collapsed. How? By doing something almost unheard of today. He took the first 3 episodes of both Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th Century Pilot Stories and released them theatrically. And Battlestar Galactica was released in Sensorround. Battlestar Galactica played foreign before it aired on television here. They often get overlooked, but growing up, these were movies to me, not simply TV on a bigger stage. I agree. I actually saw Battlestar Galactica first theatrically in Canada. If you wish to add Dan O'Bannon, the John Carpenter film Dark Star, if you wish to add the Dan O'Bannon John Carpenter film Dark Star to the list, may I make a recommendation? Weed and lots of it. I watched this film over the summer and realized this film was not intended for my 46-year-old sober lifestyle. I probably would have enjoyed it more during my carefree 20s. In any case, along with what's already been listed, I feel these films should be added. Ending this letter, I'd like to switch gears to a different era of science fiction. It is a period that lives between what is now steampunk and 1950s sci-fi, where it seemed science fact was starting to catch up to science fiction. This period between the 30s and 40s, known as diesel punk or atom punk, depending on your design sensibilities. This is where Fritz Lang's Metropolis, as well as the Buster Crabbe, Buck Rogers, and Flash Gordon serials live. We got a beautiful nod to this about 10 years ago with Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. This is where I like to live. The retro futuristic deco look of it all, to me, is so cool. If I could afford it, I'd have designers come in and remodel my home to fit the look. But for me, this period begs a question. Since we rarely get a movie exploiting the period, unless it's for parody, what do you, Rob, think might be the reason we don't visit this retro style of science fiction more often and more earnestly? Well, great letter, Mark C. First of all, there's some great science fiction films that, while hugely dated, are still very relevant today. 1970s Colossus, The Forbin Project, which for you people who love stories about computer takeovers like Skynet or things like that, Colossus, The Forbin Project did it first. It was based on a series of 3 novels, and the name of the author escapes me. One of the books is called Colossus and the Crab, but they only made Colossus, The Forbin Project. I think they only did the first film. Eric Braeden, the famous soap star, played the lead, played Dr. Forbin. In a way, Dr. Forbin is in a long line of people like Dr. Quatermass who are putting science and advancement ahead of human interest. They want to say it's for human interest, but really, maybe it's for the glorification of their own ego. But that's another film from the 70s I suggest watching. It's also available on a beautiful Blu-ray. There's a great UK Blu-ray and there's a domestic Blu-ray. I think Shout put that out as well. And there's also Silent Running, the first film that the great sci-fi maestro Douglas Trumbull directed. He also directed Brainstorm, but after doing the effects and working on 2001 with Kubrick, he later went on and directed Silent Running, which is a movie about, well, it's about the ecology. It's about the biosphere of the planet and saving the biosphere of the planet with a very unique. Well, I don't want to ruin the joys of that, but if you ever wanted to see a science fiction film that began with Joan Baez singing a Joan Baez protest song about the environment, really not a protest song, but a song about the environment, Silent Running is your film. Some of the most beautifully designed spaceships in all of science fiction history. The Valley Forge. Later, they used stock footage of the Valley Forge in the original Battlestar Galactica. And for Ron Moore and David Icke's reboot of, or David Icke, is it David Icke? David Icke? They use, or see, David Icke is the crazy guy who believes in the, anyway. They used the Silent Running design later in the reboot of Battlestar Galactica because it was so iconic. Silent Running, definitely something to see. Colossus, the Forbin Project, of course, 2001. Wild Wild Planet. Now, if you want to talk about, like, I think the reason that retro future design from that period, like, I love Fritz Lang's Metropolis. If you haven't seen Metropolis, there's many different versions of it. I think it was Kino released the one. They keep finding footage for Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, one of the great science fiction films ever made. Maria, the Robotrix. If you obviously C-3PO came from Metropolis's Maria, and if you've ever seen the film, and also Giorgio Moroder in the 80s did an 80s music version of Metropolis, which is still cool, and that's also on Blu-ray. So if you've never seen that, I highly recommend those movies as well. But to address your question, I think, Mark, the reason, look, I love Art Deco. I love Art Deco futurism. I think it's great. We saw a lot of it in Tim Burton's Batman movies. You saw a lot of it in things like The Rocketeer. I love that kind of look. I love Art Deco, the Art Deco look, but it is very much of the period. And I think the reason we don't see the future was very naive back then. And while I love the look of it, and I thought Sky Captain did a great job, the Iron Giant did a great job, The Incredibles, of course, retro futurism. I love all of that look, but of course that's not the way that we went. So it's hard to do retro futurism in an environment where you can create verisimilitude with it. So I think that's why it's not revisited that much. But the BBC has famously made a period version of War of the Worlds that I guess the original story of War of the Worlds happened in the late 1800s. So maybe we'll see a little bit of retro futurism in the Martian war machines, steampunk or atom punk, like Jeff Lynne's War of the Worlds record that we talk about all the time here lately, which is awesome. So yeah. And of course, the 50s, the science fiction films of the 50s, which did have a lot of retro futurism. I think the most of all is the granddaddy, Forbidden Planet, of course, which is the prototype for Star Trek itself. I love Forbidden Planet, even this flying saucer, but of course the Krell Labs and Morbius and all of the design work in Forbidden Planet is sort of the ultimate of retro futurism as far as that design sensibility. If you guys haven't seen Forbidden Planet, it is basically a riff on Shakespeare's The Tempest, and you got to check it out. It also has an electronic score that to this day is one of the wildest electronic scores. It's one of the earliest electronic scores that ever appeared in a film. It's really cool. Then we of course got You Have Day the Earth Stood Still, and there's so many great science fiction films that are worthy of a look-see. So you should check those out. And the thing is, you got to put yourself in the mindset, though. You got to sit down and go, okay, I know that the pacing is going to be different. Try and look at the films from the perspective of the people that were seeing them for the first time ever. And what it was like to see these movies when none of the other great fantasy films and science fiction films and horror movies that we all know now existed. It's like you're delving into the primordial soup of where all this stuff came from. And it's really interesting to watch. And there's a lot of, there's no other movie like Forbidden Planet. And it's just Technicolor glory. It's amazing to watch. It's widescreen. It's beautiful. The transfers, especially if you watch the Blu-ray version, really, really, really cool. So if you haven't seen Forbidden Planet, and then of course the George Pal films, whether it's Destination Moon, Conquest of Space, When Worlds Collide, War of the Worlds, those films all very much worth looking at. There's a lot of joy to be had, and I lived for those movies when I was a kid. Lived for them. I know if you've seen the Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds, it's a different experience going back and watching the original War of the Worlds, but it was the movie that made me want to make movies. And when I was 5 years old, War of the Worlds was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And it still is. And you can get they remastered the film in 4K. You can get it on iTunes. You should watch that version, because one of the things they did was when the Martian war machines rise up out of the gully, you could see the wires famously. I mean, people back in the day, apparently, I'm like, how could you not see those wires? But they weren't used to that, so I guess they didn't see them. But it was amazing. Amazing to watch these films. Actually, there's a lot of people I haven't even got to your super chats here. JB Bonifacio says, my favorite episode of The Twilight Zone was 5 characters in search of an exit. Lost's DNA is all over that. What was your favorite episode? Oh my God, there's so many Twilight Zone episodes that are favorites of mine. But of course, the first Twilight Zone episode I ever saw is probably my favorite for that reason, which was To Serve Man. I love To Serve Man so much. If you've never seen To Serve Man, I mean, how do you not? It's probably been parodied on. The problem with the original Twilight Zone that makes me sad is that the 5 seasons of the Twilight Zone, and of course the 4th season, the Twilight Zone were all half-hour episodes, except the episodes in the 4th season where they were all hour-long episodes. And anybody who's a true Twilight Zone connoisseur will tell you that the episodes of the 4th season don't really work as well because they're too long. Although there's a few. On Thursday We Leave for Home, I think, is a gem of an episode. There's some gems in the 4th season, certainly. And but To Serve Man is one of my favorites. Of course, you know, you think about all the classic Twilight Zone episodes, Time Enough at Last, The After Hours, Living Doll, Little Girl Lost, Eye of the Beholder, all of those. There's just so many classic episodes. Walking Distance is a favorite episode of mine. Really like the show. And, you know, 60 years. You watch these episodes, especially the Blu-rays, the first restoration I was ever impressed by in terms of television making the transition to HD was the Blu-rays for the Twilight Zone are astonishing. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe watching them on NTSC, but seeing the crispness of that black and white photography. It's just amazing. And I can't believe it's 60 years old. And what's even crazier to me is that Twilight Zone, of course, ended its run 3 years before I was born. And I think about the fact that everyone's like, oh, the Twilight Zone's this old TV show. It was only it had only been off the air 3 years when I was born. And when I started watching it when I was like 5 or 6, I mean, it was less than a decade old. And that's crazy to me. And now it's going to be 60 years old, which is insane. And now, of course, CBS All Access revived it for a 4th time. There was the 80s revival, the early aughts revival, and then there was the 4th version, which is the new CBS version that I thought was absolutely just horrifically bad. I like the 80s revival quite a bit. But you're right, JB. There's so much. I mean, the Twilight Zone, it influenced everybody. By the way, as an aside, if you guys haven't seen The Prisoner, the TV series The Prisoner, which also inspired shows like Lost, you got to check out Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner, another beautiful Blu-ray set. The restoration is incredible. I'm sure it's airing somewhere, but you got to watch The Prisoner and see how influential that was. Koba says, speaking of classic sci-fi, what's your opinion of 1953's Robot Monster? Not very high. Robot Monster was definitely it was taking what you have on hand and turning it into a movie. An ape suit and a space helmet. Wow. Not so great. Not so great. Willow Yang says, sorry for watching Star Trek on YouTube. Unfortunately, I currently don't have a television. There's no room in the house. Well, Willow, okay, but I hope at least you have a big computer screen, like, you know, like a 30-inch or 27-inch. Maybe you got a screen that's big enough and you can watch. I hope if you're watching it on like your 15-inch laptop, that would just make me sad. But I know I'm a snob when it comes to home video, and I want everybody to have the best experience. I want you to have the best screen, the best sound system. Stubble McShave says, how high are the odds that the master of fun and wonder becomes the next inner geekdom champion in the Schmodown? You know what? I was the first Inner Geekdom in the first Inner Geekdom champion. I don't want to compete anymore. You know why? Because I'd have to study. Everybody studies now. The questions are much harder than when I did it. And I like being able, like this, I can talk extemporaneously off the top of my head about all these things that I like because I've been inundated with them my whole life. But I don't remember necessarily the facts and figures of everything. And it just got me frustrated. And there were times when, as it became, the pressure was on. I don't want to compete in the Schmodown anymore. I'm content to be the greatest commissioner that the Schmodown has ever seen. I was content to create the nuke, which will be, wait, if you're a Schmodown fan, I'm telling you, the nuke, it's coming. When you find out, it changes the game forever. And I like being a manager. I'm content, Stubble, to be a manager. I can't compete anymore. These young kids today, I don't want to study. You know, there's a reason why I left college almost 3 decades ago, because I don't want to study anymore. So I don't have to, which is good. So anyway, yeah, there we go. And I really liked that Mark Chure wrote that in about that. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. You know, this is something funny. Somebody wrote in this letter, and I haven't read it. Martin Lawrence, imagination connoisseur Martin Lawrence, wrote in a letter, and this is a subject. This is a sensitive subject that might trigger some people. Certainly triggers me. Greetings and salutations, Rob. I'm writing this letter for help in understanding how on earth the Star Wars Holiday Special exists in the world. I always thought that George Lucas was so protective of the franchise, so what went wrong? We talk about verisimilitude, but this seems to have none. The makers have taken the characters and put them into a real-world setting, and it falls flat. I can't imagine Wookiees doing the laundry or watching self-help cooking shows. Would an Imperial officer really need to shop for a device to help with mustache maintenance? Mos Eisley is a hive of scum and villainy, not a place where you would find B. Arthur. Betty White, maybe, but not B. Arthur. And then we have the Wookiees. I can only imagine the makers saw that Chewbacca was called Chewie, and that's how they came up with Itchy and Lumpy. Oh, dear God, Itchy? Who in their right mind would conceive a scenario where an elderly Wookiee is sitting on a couch wearing a smut helmet, watching softcore porn while his grandson is playing in the same room? I can't ever unhear the orgasmic noises that creature is making. And then we finish with the Life Day song with poor Harrison Ford thinking he's done something terrible in a previous lifetime. I would love to get your thoughts on this, Rob. Yours sincerely, Martin L. Well, for those who know and those who've seen it, I think it was in 1978. It might have been 77. I think it was 78 maybe. But Star Wars fever had gripped the land, and they decided to make a holiday special to celebrate Star Wars. Now, here's the thing. I'm sure George Lucas was like, well, I don't know about making a holiday special, so okay, if you guys want to do that. It seemed like a good idea for old George. And they applied the sensibility of a holiday variety show, which has nothing or nor should have had anything to do with Star Wars. But they melded that with Star Wars, and it's one of the worst ideas ever to have been conceived of anybody who worked for a network. It also, the execution made it one of the worst things that's ever appeared on television. And what's so shocking about it is just how big of a cataclysmic car crash it really is. It's horrifyingly bad. I mean, I can't conceive of anything, to be honest, worse. It's that bad. If you've only heard legends of how bad the Star Wars Holiday Special is, I mean, basically the first 20 minutes is they're speaking Wookiee and walking around. You're seeing the domestic lives of Chewbacca's family. It's truly something to behold. And it is god-awful. And of course, I think every great imagination connoisseur ends up with a copy of it sometime. I have it on both VHS and DVD. It's just terrible. The only saving grace is, of course, the first appearance of Boba Fett. There's an animated sequence that's actually pretty cool in the middle of it all where Boba Fett is introduced. And it is, I mean, it's not worth it for that. I'm sure somebody's put that Boba Fett cartoon on YouTube, or it's on Vimeo, or it's just Google that. And of course, the whole thing is about Chewbacca getting home in time to celebrate Life Day, which is apparently a Wookiee holiday. With you celebrate it with the family, which is the equivalent of Christmas for them. And of course, Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Chewbacca and R2 and 3PO. It's just awful. And I think at the time, George Lucas was not expecting Star Wars to become the phenomenon that it was. Indeed, famously, he and Steven Spielberg went to Hawaii together to hide when Star Wars came out. So the idea of making a variety special about Star Wars was probably something George was like, okay, go do this. And probably didn't exercise a lot of oversight because he thought, well, how bad could it actually be? And the fact that they secured, Star Wars was really successful. Empire Strikes Back was, of course, going to get made. And so there was a lot of hope there. And it made sense that they made that show. It's just the execution, the people making it had no clue or understanding about anything to do with Star Wars. And man, it's truly one of the great misfires of all time. And for that alone, I think it's worth, I keep talking about having these great movies of yore to go back to. Watching the Star Wars Holiday Special is a cautionary tale about how to not let your properties be dealt with by other people. If you've created something, hold on to your creative rights, because let me tell you, the Star Wars Holiday Special is truly one of the worst things to ever appear, well, anywhere. Really, really, really horrifically bad. But interestingly so, because it's that awful. I saw it pop up on YouTube. I think it's out there. Mark C says that Bruce Valanche is responsible for the Star Wars Holiday Special. That explains everything. Well, pretty much. Pretty much. Willow Yang asks, what happens if someone chooses not to violate the treaty to save the Kobayashi Maru, or sends out a shuttlecraft first to check for survivors? Well, I would imagine the Kobayashi Maru is lost with all hands on board. And if you send a shuttlecraft out, the shuttlecraft is probably destroyed or something. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. No one's ever really delved. There's actually a Star Trek novel about the Kobayashi Maru called The Kobayashi Maru. Koba says, what's your favorite Ray Harryhausen film? That's easy. Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I loved Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Earth versus the Flying Saucers is Ray Harryhausen does the effects. It's the first real movie where you see aliens destroying famous landmarks, the Washington Monument, for instance. Aliens arrive on Earth. It's a great black and white alien invasion movie. I love everything about it. I love the sound effects. I love the way the flying saucers look. And it's dire. It's really serious. We're not necessarily going to win. Like War of the Worlds, there was definitely a very apocalyptic feel to that, along with War of the Worlds. Like, how are we going to prevail? I love Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I know it's not traditional Ray Harryhausen because it's not stop motion creatures. It's stop motion. Well, even though there's a little bit of that, but mostly he was stop motion. There was stop motion animating the ships, the flying saucers. I love Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I love it so much, and it's great. And you should love it too. You should love it too. If you haven't seen that, it's another great classic great classic 50s science fiction film. But yeah, here's a question. I love these questions. People don't ask me that much. But I've answered this question before, but I'm gonna answer it again. Devin Juden writes in and asks, Rob, as a kid, bonus features were just as essential for me to watch as the movie itself, which has culminated in my love for production and my passion for filmmaking. But how exactly did you break into the extra content scene? This question comes up all the time, and I've answered it before, but I'm going to answer it again because it was just asked. And when you live, I have always said that work begets work. And, nobody will recognize you for doing anything unless you've done something and you put something out there. And when I lived in LA and after I got out of school, I just started doing things, making a short film here, directing a music video there. There's always somebody that needs something done. There's a local band that wants a video, or there's a local band that wants you to shoot a performance at a local pub or something. Somebody needs their acting reel cut. So you just start doing things. And when you start meeting people and working together, work begets work. And I was hired I'd made Free Enterprise, and it didn't exactly, my first feature, it didn't exactly burn up the charts. And I was going to a lot of what I called Evian meetings. So after you've made an independent movie, and if it wins some awards and you get some sort of notoriety, everybody wants to meet with you. They don't necessarily have anything for you to do, but they want to meet with you. And I was very much a DIY guy, or DIY, do it yourself. And that's why I do a lot of things. I must say, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I have listened before the show to some original music from Tango Shalom, some finished score, and I'm very excited. It's very exciting. But it's very, very exciting. And I'm going to put it to picture after I'm over here. But so I had a friend that they were making special features for laser discs, and DVD had hit. And DVD was big, and Disney was jumping into it. And this company had been making Disney, if you collected laser discs, or if you look up laser discs, look up Disney white box special edition laser discs, these beautiful collector's editions Disney did of their classic films, both live action and animated films for Laserdisc. My friend was Michael Pellerin, and his partner Jeff Curdy, and their other partner Phil Savinick, who had a company called TV is Okay. So Curdy Pellerin and TV is Okay was producing all this content. Michael Pellerin had asked me to come to work for them, and through a series of events I did. And the first thing I worked on, the first thing he had me work on was the Fantasia Anthology DVD Set. So I actually cut a piece on a guy named Herman Schulteis. A lot of people don't know that Fantasia has a lot of physical effects in it. They actually rotoscoped, which means they basically drew over a lot of physical things. So a lot of the effects for Fantasia were actual physical things that they later drew over to animate them. And a lot of it was the brainchild of a guy named Herman Schulteis. And I did a piece on him because his notebook was discovered by his widow in their house of all the things that he had done. And so the first piece that I ever did for home video was on Herman Schulteis and Fantasia. And after that, Michael Pellerin asked me to remain at the company. So then I went on and I did things like I worked on, my next job was Emperor's New Groove. And then, of course, I famously, for me at least, made a feature-length documentary on the making of Tron for that film's anniversary release, its 20th anniversary release in 2002. And then I started my own company in my spare time and did things for Bryan Singer, like The Usual Suspects and X-Men 1 and X-Men 2. And then my company, Curdy Pellerin, got Lord of the Rings. And so that's when I was really off to the races, and I was traveling around the world, literally going to London or going to New Zealand and staying in country for months and months at a time, gathering material that you see on the extended versions of those movies. And then my own company, I formed my own company, Ludovico Technique. That was a production company in 2002. And I used Ludovico Technique as my entity that still exists today. And I began producing X-Men and Usual Suspects and Chronicles of Narnia and Superman Returns. And of course, lately, most recently for home video, Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Enterprise. So that's how I kind of stepped into it, because a friend of mine literally called me up and said, "Hey, man, would you like to come do some work on these home video pieces for me?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that's how I fell into it, you know. And again, as I said, I cannot stress enough. Now, whether you're making YouTube short films or you're doing a YouTube channel or you're making TV commercials, there's so many different ways to break in now. And having the great thing about YouTube is you have worldwide distribution for whatever you've made immediately. As soon as it's done, you can put it up on YouTube. And I don't know what stops people. If you want to become a filmmaker, start making movies. And you can set up a website and start getting the word out. I mean, when I started this channel, I started talking on Robservations. I didn't have any really subscribers, you know, to the channel. I had started a new YouTube channel, the Burnettwork, just because I was going to throw up a lot of my old stuff just to have it up there. And then I decided, people were like, you should do your own YouTube channel, or you should do your own YouTube show. And so I did. Now I'm going to pass. Hopefully, hey, if you're not a subscriber yet, subscribe today and hit like if you like these chats, because I'm close to 14,000 subscribers. And of course, YouTube, the small YouTubers, they want to crush us. Basically, they want the analytics to favor the large corporations and larger entities. So the independent YouTuber needs likes. Got to hit like all you want. Please help us out. If you don't like me, That's okay. Like whoever you like. If you like other YouTube channels, go in and give them a like, because if we're young and new and independent like this channel is, the Burnettwork is young and new, and Robservations is, this is only the 9th month I've been doing this. So do that for me. But you've got a worldwide distribution network that someone else has paid for, and it's pretty incredible. So if you want to get into making something, whatever it is, whether it's documentary shorts or whatever, you've got the venue. I mean, the big problem was no matter what you made, who's going to see it? But now, of course, you've got worldwide distribution for free in the guise of YouTube, which is pretty incredible. So I definitely would recommend, if you want to become a filmmaker, please do so and get out there and make this stuff, make it happen. So absolutely. Here's an interesting one. This is an interesting letter. I wasn't going to read this, but it's an older letter, but I wanted to read it. This one comes from Adam Blue. Adam Blue says, "Greetings, Rob. You sure have been channeling the love for Star Wars lately. You got me to write this letter despite the usual pushback on some speculation. I could write a book about Star Wars, and maybe I have a few times already, so I'll keep this one focused. As a huge fan of Star Wars for most of my life, I'm excited to see what happens in Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. But Dark Rey has brought some old theories back around. Before George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, he created a lot of content with the help of The Valuation, one of the last books, if not the last, to be released before Disney's acquisition, was the infamous Darth Plagueis novel. George Lucas and another top Lucasfilm exec shaped how the Plagueis novel would turn out. To George, this was canon of the highest order, setting up what Disney could potentially do with the rest of the franchise. Another imagination connoisseur did write in about the book, sharing important details with the community, one being that James Luceno, who wrote the book, was tasked to write the canon novel Tarkin. In Tarkin, Luceno makes references to the Plagueis novel, specifically Plagueis' droid and the action of feeling the Force reacting to Palpatine and his master trying to manipulate it, eventually creating Anakin. Later in the Plagueis novel, Palpatine and Plagueis find out about Anakin during the Episode 1 timeline, and when Palpatine killed Plagueis, he electrocuted him as he was sleeping, but Plagueis did wake up and face Palpatine. Eventually, he fell, and the novel describes his respirator stopped clicking. Then it is described that a Dwarty statue falls on Plagueis. That's an interesting detail, as these statues are not only seen throughout the prequels in Palpatine's various quarters, but Snoke's ring has a Dwarty engraving on them, the same ring that contains obsidian from Vader's castle. I don't know if you saw the infamous Comic-Con panel interview with the Force Awakens cast, including JJ, that when asked about Plagueis, you can see that JJ and Lawrence Kasdan knew what was being asked, but wasn't sure how to answer it. JJ even stated Kasdan was kidding when he pretended he didn't hear what he said. But even since that time, while some fans want Plagueis to happen, others tend to be very vocal about shutting that idea down. Where is this going? Well, I could write another page or two linking Plagueis to the sequel trilogy, but instead I'll lump into my speculation now that Dark Rey has appeared. Rey has a staff which is very closely modeled after the Hasbro Dark Plagueis staff, which is also his lightsaber. Even if it's not his staff, the design elements of Rey's staff incorporate Maul's lightsaber. That could be a coincidence from materials the design team used, but I'm just stating this as a visible fact. If Dark Rey is just a vision, I'm sure people would be disappointed. I know I would be. There could be a vision about anything. But what if this wasn't a vision, but a flashback? What if Rey was a Force user created by Palpatine and Plagueis' essence eventually transferred to her? Palpatine's plan was for the First Order to wait for him in the unknown regions, and Snoke came out of nowhere and took command. Snoke is not a Sith, but he does have a Duarte ring. When we see Dark Rey in the new footage, she doesn't have Sith eyes. You know who else wasn't Sith? Plagueis. In fact, Plagueis didn't want to be a Sith and did not train Palpatine to be a Sith. Instead, Palpatine discovered about the Sith and the rule of two, then took it upon himself to kill his master. He thought his master was hiding the way of the Sith from him so he wouldn't be killed. Plagueis has also thought that working in that manner would never allow dark side users to figure out immortality. So, could we be seeing some sort of flashback scene when Plagueis was inhabiting Rey? And possibly the Knights of Ren were working with Snoke to stop Palpatine from coming back, so they defeated Rey, gave her false memories, and plopped her down on Jakku? Who knows? But here are some threads that need to be solved. Why was Rey on Jakku with the Millennium Falcon? Palpatine's Sith Observatory and Lord Santeca's with the map to Luke. Also, if Palpatine planned to take control of the First Order, mentioned in canon novels, what delayed him from doing so? And why is Snoke, a non-Sith darkside user, commanding the First Order? I don't mind these plot holes as long as they are explained. Otherwise, no verisimilitude, just coincidence to move the plot along. Now, the most disappointing thing would be Disney coming out and telling us that Snoke was Palpatine. That goes against the hints set up in the canon novels and wastes the talents of Andy Serkis. If we were going to hire an actor to play an inhuman bad guy character like Plagueis, Andy Serkis would be a good fit. Also, are we seeing Sith troopers and red-accented Star Destroyers? So it makes me think with Snoke gone, Palpatine was able to come back? So what do you think of the Dark Rey scene being a flashback? Or Rey reawakens as Plagueis and Kylo resurrects Anakin and we see Hayden Christensen kill Plagueis? That would be an awesome ending. Thanks for reading, Adam B. Well, Mr. Blue, I think you've put a lot more into this than J.J. Abrams probably has. And I think this is the problem with this new sequel trilogy. I wish that they were as well thought out as your letter here is. But they're not. You know, when somebody comes along, all of this requires an intimate knowledge of the backstory and the canon novels and, of course, the expanded universe books that are no longer canon. Now they're the Legends books. It's unfortunate because all of this information is out there. And I think that I've always said this, my friend Dave Hargrove and I talk about this a lot. If you buy a franchise like Disney did, there should be a story group. And I know there is. I mean, I know there is, but there's got to be a story group of people like this that can help beat out what would a new trilogy be. Certainly, Lawrence Kasdan and J.J. Abrams are going to try and create their own thing. They might have the broad strokes, but they didn't go in and do this. If they did, we would have received a better story. I mean, look, a lot of people love Force Awakens. I don't know what it's about. I still don't know what it's about. Is it about Rey? Why is there Star Killer Base? Where's the First Order? You don't know. You don't know any of these things. I don't want to get into a whole, well, you didn't know anything about Luke either. Well, yeah, but the storytelling was far sounder in Star Wars than it is in this new trilogy. But I thought this was really interesting. I mean, if in fact what you're bringing up here is what they do in the movie, I'd be like, great, bring that on. I would love it if we got that level of thought put in to this movie. I just don't think we will. I don't, and I think, there's all these rumors about what's going on with the movie and recutting things and if it's all going to work. I don't know. I don't know if it's all going to work. I don't know if those rumors are true, but I would imagine they ring true to me only because they didn't know where they were going. So they are literally making it up as they go along. And watching this film at the end, how do you make something like this satisfying? That means the movie has to start on a huge note. It has to end on a huge note. It has to deal with there is no storyline at the end of the Last Jedi. There's no story. Our characters, where are our characters going? We don't even know. They don't know. They've been resoundingly defeated. I mean, Luke helped them escape, but there's no place for them to go. It's not like The Empire Strikes Back where we know, they got to go rescue Han Solo now. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And it'll be interesting to see because if indeed, J.J. Abrams he stole so much. Force Awakens is just a mishmash of what had come before. Without much originality. So I expect that he hoped that he could do the same thing with this new film with Rise of Skywalker. I mean, I can't even imagine they're backed into that name. And if in fact the idea then is if the Rise of Skywalker is the rise of the name Skywalker, or new Force users, everybody can be a Skywalker. You're a Skywalker. You're a Skywalker. Wouldn't you like to be a Skywalker too? I mean, if that's the way it's going to go, that isn't really the story they're telling. And that's certainly not the story of Star Wars. So it'll be interesting to see. I think they're backed into a corner. I don't know where that's going to wind up, but we shall see. I mean, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where all of that goes, if it's even going to work. I don't know. I don't know. It's very, very hard to say. But what do you think? I don't know. What do you guys think? We're going to find out. We're going to find out next month. They're going to release a trailer. I love this next letter. This next letter comes from imagination connoisseur Johnny 5. Johnny 5 is alive. This one comes from Johnny 5. Hey, Rob. Longtime viewer of yours, starting with Collider, Heroes, and Comic Book Shopping with John Schnepp. I love doing that episode of Comic Book Shopping with Schnepp. I'm not that into comics, but felt compelled to watch those shows and learn a little more about comic book heroes. I continue to watch you on your own channel and on the John Campea show, so thanks for putting yourself out there. I really enjoy your opinions and perspective on things. I liked your thoughts on verisimilitude regarding Star Wars. I agree that Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, isn't as believable as the first two movies. It's too comical and kid-friendly for my taste. Anyway, that got me thinking about the fourth Indiana Jones movie. Uh-oh. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There are many moments that are just not believable. Starting right from the beginning, when the big Russian thug walks forward, bends down to tie a shoe, and half a dozen other guys seem to appear out of nowhere from behind with guns. I guess I was supposed to believe that we all lined up single file behind the Russian guy without anyone noticing. Yeah, right. Of course, there's when Indy climbs into the refrigerator and survives a nuclear blast. Not believable. Although I quite liked the Area 51 scene, Cate Blanchett overacted in a role which made her character not believable. And I even like the Doom Town scene. Maybe it's because there's something about 50s and 60s that draws me in. The architecture, the clothing, the designs. North by Northwest, my second favorite film behind Raiders of the Lost Ark, was filmed in 1959. Besides being a great story of mistaken identity, it's beautiful to look at. I mean, I've dreamed of owning a cantilever-style house that's at the end of the movie. So do we all, man. Good call. So cool. But getting back to Indy 4, even though I really like the Doomtown scene, Indy surviving a nuclear blast from inside of a refrigerator has no verisimilitude. I could go on and on about the flaws, but instead I'll point out my favorite part of Crystal Skull. My favorite scene, and scene that has the most verisimilitude in my opinion, is the motorcycle chase through the Yale campus. I believe every moment of it. Being chased through the library, through the courtyard, through the crowded streets. I even believed Indy could get pulled off the back of a motorcycle into a car and out the other side back onto the motorcycle. As silly as that sounds, the way they filmed it worked for me. I've often wondered if that was Spielberg's contribution or Lucas's. I'd have to bet it was Spielberg's. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time. Thanks for listening, Johnny 5. Well, Johnny 5, I think it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of people write off Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I do too. I think it's really a god-awful film. But there are things to like in it. I think there's things to like in most movies, even the most god-awful ones. But there is something about, look, agreed, that chase scene through the Yale campus I think is wonderful. It's Indiana Jones all the way. It's a great updated scene. But there's so much in that movie that it just abandons. It feels like a cartoon. And I think that it feels like it's an animated film, or it tries to be an animated movie. And what was really interesting was the Indiana Jones movies, especially Raiders. Sure, it's very stylized. Raiders is actually a very stylized movie, but it creates its own internal reality. There is, and this is what people don't understand. When I'm talking about verisimilitude, I'm talking about verisimilitude within the confines, within the proscenium of the frame of the film that you're watching. Because movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark can have these over-the-top action scenes and a lot of craziness, like running from the boulder, the whole invasion of that temple in the beginning of the movie. It's done so well. Certainly it's stylized and it's amusing, and the way it's done is definitely, it's not realistic necessarily, but it has verisimilitude within the universe that Raiders of the Lost Ark so carefully creates, that 30s serial universe. And it works beautifully. Sure, people are going to say, well, what about this matte painting? Look, I get it. But for the quality, the what they're trying to do in Raiders, it all works. It's all of a piece. There's nothing in it where you go, that could never happen. I mean, there are people that are going to say, I understand there's that one big, the big ask, I think, in Raiders, aside from the fact the power of God comes out and vanquishes the Nazis at the end of the movie. But in terms of the internal verisimilitude that the Raiders, the first Raiders, that Raiders of the Lost Ark tries to convey, the only thing that you can go is the U-boat, because Indiana Jones is hanging off the U-boat, and the U-boat travels quite a distance and it never goes under the water. Now, I could believe that. You know, I just believe that maybe it would go under the water, especially with its cargo, that it's who would want to be tracked, knowing what they're carrying. And the idea that Indiana Jones is able to hang off the periscope or hang on the top of the boat, it never goes underwater, killing him because he would be stuck out there. But it doesn't take me out of the movie. I'm like, well, maybe they just didn't go into the water. That's the answer to that question. I don't sit there and go, oh. But there is no internal reality to look at the opening of the movie where you see a gopher come out of a molehill, you know, and the idea of using the Paramount Mountain in the way they use the Paramount Mountain. First of all, in the beginning of Raiders, it's so great. And then the beginning of Temple of Doom, it's also great. By the time you get to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the whole idea of the Paramount Mountain then dissolving into something became a joke. And you see a gopher come out of it, you're laughing. That to me is the animated version of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. If they turn the movie into an animated film, that might be kind of funny. But as soon as they did that, the verisimilitude of the Raiders films was gone. And I think also Last Crusade, with all of the subpar effects and things like that, when going going through the tunnel with the pilot, I mean, they just went too far. And that is something I think that's a really interesting movie to talk about verisimilitude with, because Raiders does a very good job of it. Temple of Doom kind of does, but there's a lot of things that really push verisimilitude, like the raft. Even though I like that scene, there was something about Temple of Doom because it was a little heightened, so you buy into it. But by the time you get to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, man, it's really out the window. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the problem with the movies. You don't believe it. You believe the other three Raiders movies, even when it skirts the edge of verisimilitude or crosses over it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had none. Topaz Dude 17 asks, Robert, have you read the comic Planetary by Warren Ellis? I feel it's the only work I've read that actually manages to honor the things it's exploring without going into full-blown nostalgia worship. Topaz Dude 17 asks a very good question. The series Planetary by Warren Ellis is a very interesting comic book series because within the confines of its scientific mystery, which is great, each issue presents a pop culture or comic book or sci-fi fantasy trope and looks at it in a very different way. It sort of deconstructs those things and presents a meta look within the confines of the story that's being told at everything from, well, the Fantastic Four to Godzilla. And if you are an imagination connoisseur and you have Planetary is a finite series, it is a wonderful, I think there's a Planetary omnibus so you can buy the whole series. It is a series that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a wonderful, wonderful comic book series. And even if you're not a comic book fan, but you're an imagination connoisseur, I mean, it helps because there's a lot of comic book tropes in it. But it's great. And it's one of my favorite comic series of, I don't know if it might be even older than 20 years now, but I love Planetary. I have, of course, the absolute versions of it. I love Planetary so much. It's a really interesting commentary on pop culture. And if you haven't read Planetary, I highly recommend it because it's one of my favorite comic book series of all time. It's really, really good. So check it out. I highly recommend it. Good call there nice pull on that. Really good. This is another, since we're talking about I was talking about old science fiction films. You know what I wasn't talking about? Horror movies. This comes from Stephen Beam. Hey, Rob, I was just hoping to get your opinion on a few horror films from my childhood that scared the shit out of me when I was young. Obviously, I was just a kid, so of course they were going to scare me, but I really wasn't able to appreciate them until I was older. Some of these movies are probably not the most popular films in the world, but they left a mark on me of how creepy they were, and they're often used as the grading bar for future horror films. Here they are. An American Werewolf in London. That howl is still one of the scariest howls on the planet. Rawhead Rex, which is based on a Clive Barker story. Vamp, creepy as fuck. Grace Jones had to rewatch Conan the Destroyer multiple times to stop being afraid of her. The Gate. The whole demon element was just creepy altogether, and Phantasm, still creepy. There's obviously more like A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Howling, but was just curious of your opinion on the four named previously and where they sit in the horror genre for you. Thank you, and I'm proud to be a Post-Geek Singularity hero, and congratulations on 200 shows. Well, first of all, Stephen Beam, thank you for writing in. Now, this is a very interesting, eclectic list. First of all, An American Werewolf in London, I think, is one of the great modern horror films. It's very deft at going between real horror, fantasy horror, humor, and almost out-and-out parody. And I love the film. I dearly love An American Werewolf in London. I think it's probably John Landis's dear, as much as I hold Animal House dear to my heart. I think American Werewolf in London is one of his, I think it's his best movie. I really love the film. I think it's great. I think it has great scares in it. I love, it's got his undead best friend coming back. It's got true horror, and there's some great horrific dream sequences in the film. And the transformation scene, still to this day, Rick Baker's transformation scene in An American Werewolf in London is probably unparalleled. And I know we've seen everything is done CG now, but there's a physicality to those physical effects that really sells it. Sells the horror of and the pain of transforming into a werewolf. Love that film. Rawhead Rex, I can understand why you liked it. I thought I was a little older when I saw it, so it was a lesser effort. And I thought one of the very early Clive Barker adaptations in the wake of Hellraiser. I can understand why you liked it, and I don't want to take that away from you. Not a great film for me. Vamp I saw as more of a parody too, a comedy. Grace Jones is creepy, definitely, but I didn't like it as much as I would have liked to have liked it, although it's pretty good. I mean, I enjoy watching it. In terms of mid-level vampire movies, something like Landis's own Innocent Blood, I like probably a little bit more, but Vamp's more of a scary kind of a thing, and Grace Jones is, like you said, scary. The Gate, everybody likes The Gate. I think I probably was a little older when I saw The Gate, so I didn't dig it. But it's okay. It's fun. I've gone back to rewatch it. There's certain joys about The Gate. There's some neat special effects in it. Phantasm. Still to this day, one of my favorite horror films of all time. Certainly one of the great indie movies ever made. Not just, it is the nightmare logic. There's so much. I find Phantasm is now like a kid's movie. If you watch it today, it's almost like a Disney film, even though it has the flying silver spheres that land on your head and drill into your brain and literally pump your brains out, liquefy and pump them out. I love Phantasm. I love everything about Phantasm. It's Don Coscarelli. God love him, and God love him for making Phantasm. I don't think the sequels come anywhere near the original, although I enjoy the sequels. The first movie is so charming, and really, I think what makes the first movie so great is it's really about a kid's fear of being abandoned. He's already lost his parents and his brother. He's just as terrified of being left alone. So there's something more going on in the movie, despite all the craziness that goes on. And Reggie the Ice Cream Man, the Tall Man's one of the great horror villains of all time. And the film's nightmarish logic and the crazy stuff that happens in it. It's so entertaining. I love Phantasm so much. Fred Morrow and Malcolm Seagrave's unbelievable score. Oh, I love that score so much. It's got one of the great themes of all time. I can't say enough good things about Phantasm. I dearly, dearly love it. As a matter of fact, I have both the Arrow box set and the Well Go box set. I don't know why, just because I love Phantasm. I love it so much. And it's a terrific, terrific movie. I also have owned the one sheet since it came out. Love that poster. I love everything about Phantasm. But in terms of, for me, these are your list is interesting because it's very much a fantasy. There's a fantasy bent to it. Rawhead Rex as a monster. Vamp has Grace Jones. American Werewolf in London. The Gate obviously has as charming. These are more fantastical movies, and I can understand why they scared you. When I was a kid, along the lines of something like The Gate, the scariest movie I ever saw, and I'm talking about, I don't know, 6 or 7, was a TV movie. Guillermo del Toro remade it. He produced the remake, but it was a TV movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark with Kim Darby. When I was like 5 or 6 years old, that was a scary. The scariest things that I had seen was James Earl Jones on Sesame Street counting from 1 to 10, or 10 to 1. Or 1, yeah, maybe it was 1 to 10. It's on. You can look at it. It was the scariest thing I ever saw. I couldn't deal with it. Like when I was 4 years old or whatever, I couldn't handle James Earl Jones. Not because he was a scary looking guy. It was his voice, and I didn't know the anticipation of getting to where he was going to go with the numbers. I was like, what's going to happen? Even though he smiles and you look at it now, it doesn't seem scary. It was the scariest thing ever. So James Earl Jones counting from 1 to 10 in Sesame Street, or counting down from 10 to 1. That was the scariest thing I ever saw. That was the scary. And when I was a little kid, that was the scariest thing. I couldn't even be in the room. When I was watching Sesame Street, I had to leave. And that's why when I first saw Star Wars, I've told this story before, I knew whose voice it was. I didn't know James Earl Jones's name at the time. But when I was 10 years old, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. It was the first time I ever thought, man, people in Hollywood are really smart, because they got the guy who counted from the guy who counted to 10 on Sesame Street to be the voice of Darth Vader, which it was amazing. I can't stress. But in terms of movies, the TV movie that my mom used to get these great babysitters. I used to have the hottest bunch of babysitters when I was a kid. My mom, I don't know if she knew what she was doing when she picked them for me, but she knew what she was doing. But one of my first and oldest, she wasn't old. I mean, she was one of my first babysitters that I was totally in love with, was a girl named Debbie Black. And one night she had seen Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, and she knew it was playing because it was a TV movie. That was the scariest movie I ever saw when I was like 6. Terrifying. You go back and watch it now, it's not so terrifying. But you can get it. Warner Archive did release a DVD of it. It's amazing. The movie was charming, but it wasn't as scary as the original TV movie. It was beautifully done, but that was the scariest thing. But the movies that really scared me, again, when I saw The Exorcist when I was 13 years old. The Exorcist was probably one of the scariest movies. Dawn of the Dead. I don't know why the whole idea of the zombie apocalypse really played in. I know you look at it now, people aren't scared of it, but it was the idea of Dawn of the Dead. And I'd read the novelization by George Romero and Susanna Sparrow, and I saw Dawn of the Dead before I saw Night of the Living Dead. And the whole idea of the undead and society collapsing spoke to my great fears. So the original Dawn of the Dead, while I didn't think it was overtly terrifying watching it, it had a very unsettling feeling that never really went away for a long time. I was very unsettled by the idea of the zombie apocalypse. But there were movies that I go back to The Exorcist. I still think The Exorcist is one of the scariest movies ever made, and not like jump scare scary, but truly unsettling. And I go back and I think about some of the horror films. It was a great era to grow up in because I got to go see all of those movies. And while they weren't overtly scary, David Cronenberg's body horror films unsettled me. They Came From Within, Rabid. The Brood really bothered me. When I saw The Brood for the first time, I saw it in a theater before Scanners opened at the Coliseum Theater. And there was something about The Brood that really bothered me when I was a kid, when I saw it. I saw it, I want to say in 80. Did Scanners come out in 80? That's when I saw The Brood. And it was because the whole movie was about the destruction of the family and how parents, and if they don't get along, and what divorce can do to a kid. And it was just like, it just creeped me out. And I remember being creeped out by a movie called The Sentinel. They actually used, The Sentinel is a movie that basically is about a gateway to hell. And they have all these demon creatures spilling through the gateway, and they use people that had really lost limbs and things like that to play these. The Sentinel, not a great movie, but definitely worth watching. But there, oh God, there's so many. You know, I've got to do one day. I'm going to do a show on my favorite horror movies of all time. I need to do a whole show, and there's a lot of them. You know, I think back to I thought stuff like Mario Bava's Black Sunday when I was a kid, or Mask of the Demon. Those are the same movie, they're just different titles. The atmospherics, the original Frankenstein scared the hell out of me the first time I saw it. The arm crawling, I couldn't deal when I was looking, but I loved it. I love those things. I thought it was great. I love these things so much. But you know, again, I was a little older when Nightmare on Elm Street and The Howling. I mean, The Howling came out at the same time as American Werewolf in London, and Rob Bottin did the transformation effects, and that was a nasty piece of work. I loved all that. By the time I was after The Exorcist, all horror films were just fun for me. No matter how scary they were, I love those movies. I love them so much. So I wasn't scared by them anymore. You know, I loved, like, Exorcist 3 still has the greatest jump scare of all time, although James Wan has become the master of the jump scare. So, yeah, Stubble McShave says, I'm going to start reading the Hyperion books. Have you read the book series? If so, what are your favorite aspects? Try and avoid major plot spoilers. Okay. The Hyperion Cantos, as they are now known, there are 4, actually, and there's a book of short stories. But the Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion it was written as one book. Dan Simmons is one of my favorite writers. My favorite genre. He writes in many different genres, but he's written some of my favorite books. Carrion Comfort is one of my favorite horror novels. The Hyperion Cantos, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, and then Endymion and Rise of Endymion. Not as good as Hyperion, but still great. I love Hyperion. If you want to read great modern science fiction, although it's, 25 years old now or something, the Hyperion Cantos, everything about it, it's so great. I mean, there's an incredible universe depicted in the books. Basically, the Hyperion Cantos are about a group of travelers that are all going to this planet where the Shrike, this creature lives, that this horribly violent creature that will kill anybody that crosses its paths. They're all going. It's basically it's known as the Canterbury Tales in space. So you have the story of these different characters. You keep jumping in and out of the stories of these different characters, traveling for their various reasons to confront this creature. That's basically it in a nutshell. There's so much more to it, though. It's one of the great science fiction novels, and I don't want to say much more about it. But I don't know, you know, at least Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, Endymion and Rise of Endymion were written later, but Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, I tore through those books. As a matter of fact, I have a first edition hardcover of both of them, and I got them signed by Dan Simmons himself. So please report back. I love those books so very much. So check them out and report back. Just Plain Steve says, for me, seeing the human-faced dog in Invasion of the Body Snatchers was the stuff of nightmares. Terrifying. I love dogs. I have to tell you, the Philip Kaufman Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978 scared the hell out of me when I saw it in the theater. I was terrified by that film by the end. It was terrifying, and I could not believe the ending. Now, I just couldn't, again, I'm like, I can't believe they're ending this movie this way. Of course, Alien in the theater and Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the theater, you're going from 78 to 79, bone-chilling movies. I mean, those films and the original, Philip Kaufman's remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of the great horror films. And I think it's, you know, again, it's like a Quatermass movie. It's like you've got this invasion from space. Although the great thing about Invasion of the Body Snatchers is certainly in the Philip Kaufman version, I've said this so many times on the show, is that the invasion has already happened. It's just the main characters don't know it yet. And that's what I think is so great. And the fatalistic and nightmarish ending is so good. It's so well done. The rising paranoia of that film, it really, like The Exorcist, it casts a spell. It really casts a spell. If you guys haven't seen the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it has lost none of its power. It has peak verisimilitude. And yes, that dog creature is one of the great creatures in a movie. I mean, it's amazing. And of course, you know, again, Alien was terrifying too. I was terrified of Alien when I first saw it because of the tension. I thought it was just, you know, really brilliantly done. Alien is a perfect movie. Raiders and Alien, Jaws, those things they're all perfect movies. But yes, the human face dog, Just Plain Steve, you nailed that one, sir. Absolutely correct. There's some truly chilling stuff going on in that film. So yeah, I give it up to you. That is a great call. I should have been able to come up with that on my own, but I forget. I've got so much to think about. I'm thinking about letters and writing and what I'm going to do and who I'm going to read. But yeah. So anyway, I think I'm going to bring this chat now to a close, ladies and gentlemen. It's 2:45. We've been here for an hour and 45 minutes. It's been a good one. It's been a good chat, even though I got spammed, which means, I got to thank the old moderators, my moderators that are here. Terry Flynn, as I like to call him, the sheriff of Nottingham now. Terry Flynn is here. Of course, Detective Jim Boyers is here. They staved off an attack. It was like Assault on Precinct 13 all up in this hizzle. So thanks to my moderators, Greg, the Honorable Mike Bodden, who's been so busy working. He hasn't been around much. But thank you to my moderating staff for fending off an attack today. It's weird when you get spam like that. You'd hope that it would be something interesting, but it wasn't. I want to thank all of the people that are supporting me via the chats and via the Burnettwork.net websites. Go to the Burnettwork.net. Send me letters. I know I'm back sort of behind on the letters. Tomorrow I'm going to delve in and really get into those letters. If you like these chats, please hit like, please hit subscribe. That helps the analytics. Things are changing. They're getting wacky over here on YouTube. As many people know, there's some things coming down the pike that I haven't really talked about. I'm moving into the Imaginarium soon. You're going to see the production value. But a lot of people have sent me stuff. A lot of people have mailed me things. I'm not going to say who. I know they haven't. And people are probably like, geez, Rob, I sent you something. You haven't dealt with it yet. Well, you've been sending those things to a P.O. box that's in Iowa. And I've been waiting because I'm going to do an unboxing of everything people have sent me at the Iowa P.O. box. And I know people like Lynn Hobday, who's in Japan, has sent me something. I don't know what it is. And Mike Bodden is going to be here, and I'm going to do a live stream with Mike, and I'm going to unbox all the stuff people have sent me. So I hope, it's not like dog feces or something like that, but I'm going to do an unboxing and show what everybody sent, because that'll be kind of fun. So if all of you imagination connoisseurs who have sent me things are like, gee, Rob, you never thanked me, or we've been saving it. It's going to be a big event. Mike is coming out here to LA. I'm still building the new set. Going to be on it. I mean, basically, imagine it's going to be, it's like being in a library or a comic book store. That's what it looks like. You're going to see, I'm going to be surrounded by books and action figures and craziness all around me, 360 degrees. It's going to be a studio setting, and it's cool. So Mike Bodden will be there. We're going to do an unboxing, and that is coming soon, in just a couple weeks, more toward the end of September. I'm going to have a lot more Tango Shalom news. We're in the final stretches of that. Pretty exciting. And again, I can't thank you guys enough. I'm going to get back into the letters tomorrow. I know we're backlogged a couple of days. I missed yesterday because I was recording Inglorious Trexperts podcasts. I think we did 5 or 6 of them yesterday. I don't even remember. It was such a blur. For those of you who are Star Trek fans, please tune in to the Inglorious Trexperts podcast. You can find them wherever podcasts are available. It's a lot of fun. I'm a guest on many of the shows. Sometimes I'm not, but we've interviewed everybody. The great thing about the Inglorious Trexperts podcast is we have actual people that worked on Star Trek. Some of the actors, some of the production people. There's always interesting topics to discuss. A lot of fun. So check that out. And for that, now I'm going to bring this chat to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank all of you imagination connoisseurs. And I will say this. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And watch lots of classic science fiction and horror films and report back to me. Step out of your wheelhouse. Watch something new. Anyway, thanks very much. And as always, have a better day.